The sound of a betrothal bond link hitting a stone table is smaller than you might expect. It is barely a click, a whisper of metal against rock, the kind of sound you would miss if you were not paying attention. But when it happens in the great hall of the Silverwood Pack, with 200 wolves watching in breathless silence, it lands like a war drum in the chest of every person present. She did not throw it. She did not slam it. She set it down with the calm of a woman who had decided, somewhere in the last 30 seconds, that she was done being careful with things that no longer deserved her care. Her name was Rachel Mooncrest. She was 24 years old. She was wearing a forest green dress she had chosen herself, because green made her feel like she belonged to something ancient and enduring. She had given this man 2 years of her life. She had memorized the names of every pack elder in 6 allied territories. She had stood beside him at every gathering, every feast, every ceremony, as patient and as sure as the moon overhead. And in return, he had weighed her against a border agreement and found her inconvenient. Every wolf in that hall believed her story was over. They were wrong, because 4 miles down the frost-covered forest road, on a night so cold the stars looked like they had been cut from glass, the ground itself was beginning to tremble, not from thunder, not from a shifting wolf, but from the thunder of 8 black horses moving fast and deliberate through the dark, drawing a carriage that bore on its obsidian door a crest that every wolf in every pack on the continent recognized and feared. A snarling wolf beneath a crown of thorns, the royal seal of the Alpha King, and Harrison Wolfbane was not riding toward her to offer comfort. He was riding toward her to offer a crown. The hall smelled of pine resin, old stone, and the specific, crackling tension of a room full of wolves pretending not to stare. Iron sconces held torches that burned too bright. The pack elders sat in a curved row along the far wall, like judges at a trial no one had officially called. Beatrice Wolfhart, the eldest among them, a silver-haired woman with a spine like a blade, sat at the center with her hands folded and her eyes very still. Rachel had been standing at the stone table for what felt like the length of a season. In truth, it had been 4 minutes. She had counted her own heartbeats to know. Across the table from her stood Dominic Ashfang, beta of the Silverwood Pack, and, until approximately 4 minutes ago, her intended mate. He was tall, sandy-haired, and well-dressed in the way that men who care deeply about appearances are always well-dressed. He had the careful expression of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say several times in a mirror, and believed himself to be delivering it with admirable kindness. He was not. "It is a matter of bloodline, Rachel." He said it the way one delivers a weather report. Matter of fact. Mild. As if the words were information and not a verdict, Rachel said nothing. Inside her chest, something animal and furious was pressing against her ribs. She did not let it out. She held herself very still and she listened. Because she was the kind of woman who believed you should always hear the full truth before you decided what to do with it. The Winterbourne Pack has offered an alliance, Dominic continued, adjusting his cufflinks, a gesture so small and so ordinary that it made the moment almost obscene. Their daughter, Juliet. Her bloodline carries dominant, alpha-class genetics. It is a significant advantage in territorial negotiations. Pack law recognizes the right of a beta to... "I know pack law," Rachel said quietly. Dominic paused. He looked slightly surprised, as if he had forgotten she could speak. "The mating ceremony is 3 weeks away," he said, recovering. "I thought it kinder to tell you now." Kinder. The word settled on her chest like a stone dropped from a great height. She looked at him for a long, measured moment. Dominic shifted under her gaze. Good. He should. She had given this man 2 years. Not just the visible, ceremonial years. The season gatherings and the bond announcements, and the formal dinners where she had worn the right dress and said the right things. She had given him the invisible years. The mornings she had spent learning the political geography of the Eastern Territories so she could advise him. The nights she had spent managing the household correspondence he found tedious. The quiet, tireless labor of a woman who had been building something she believed in. He had confused her softness for smallness. He had confused her patience for passivity. He had confused her love for a service he was entitled to, and now he stood across a stone table and used the word kinder while she watched him adjust his cufflinks and looked, just once, just for a single careless moment, toward the back of the hall. Rachel followed his gaze. There, half hidden behind a stone pillar, stood Juliet Winterbourne. She was golden, polished, wearing the quiet, restrained expression of a woman who had been expecting exactly this outcome for some time. She was not gloating. That would have been too obvious. She was simply present, already occupying a future she had not yet been formally offered. Rachel looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then she returned her eyes to Dominic. She reached up. Her fingers found the clasp of the silver chain at the back of her neck, the betrothal bond link he had placed there himself at the autumn ceremony 2 years prior, on a golden evening when she had believed him, completely and without reservation. She unclasped it. She set it on the stone table between them. The sound it made was small. The silence it created was enormous. "I expect you to handle this with grace," Dominic said, and his voice had gone a shade firmer, the tone of a man accustomed to compliance. "Tell the others you ended it. I will give you that much." Rachel looked at him. She looked at the bond link on the table between them. She looked at Beatrice Wolfhart, sitting in judgment along the wall, who met her gaze with something that might have been pity and might have been resignation, and offered neither help nor protest. Then she turned toward the great oak doors at the far end of the hall. She heard Dominic say her name with the particular sharpness of someone who is not accustomed to being ignored. She paused at the door. She turned back just far enough so her voice would carry to every corner of the room, to every elder, every warrior, every wolf who was pretending not to have heard every word. "I will tell them exactly what happened, Dominic, that the beta of Silverwood weighed me against an alliance and found me inconvenient." She held his gaze for one final, even moment. "I hope the Winterbourne gold is worth it. I genuinely do." She pushed open the oak doors. She walked out into the cold night air. The forest road that stretched between Silverwood Pack territory and her father's modest lands was 4 miles of pine-dark silence, under a sky so clear and cold it felt brittle. She had no carriage, no escort, no one had offered, and she had not asked. Her boots crunched on frost-hardened earth. The full moon hung overhead, huge and white and beautiful and completely merciless, the way the moon always is. It illuminated the empty road in front of her, and the empty road behind her, and the great dark line of the trees on both sides, and her, alone in the middle of all of it. She allowed herself exactly one sound, a single sharp breath caught somewhere between a sob and a sigh, that she swallowed before it could become something larger. That was all. She was not a woman who came apart in the open. She began to walk. She counted her steps the way she used to count her breathing when she was small and frightened during the long, loud storms that crossed the Highland territories every autumn. 1, 2, 3, 4. Keeping herself tethered to something simple and manageable while the bigger things raged around her. The reality of her situation arrived in pieces, the way cold does. Not all at once, in increments, each one colder than the last. She was unmated, publicly discarded, 3 weeks before a ceremony that the entire Allied region had received formal invitations to attend. She had no carriage and 4 miles of frost road ahead of her, and the dress she had chosen for its strength and its beauty was now simply a green dress on a road in the dark, belonging to no one. She stopped walking. She tipped her face up toward the moon. She thought about her father, Christopher Mooncrest, a quiet man with a modest territory and a pack that had held itself together through generations of careful, patient work. He had been so proud when the betrothal was announced. He had held her face in his hands and looked at her the way parents do when they believe the hardest part of worrying is finally behind them. What had just happened in that great hall would reach him by morning. She would not let it reach him as a tragedy. She made herself a promise in the dark. Not out loud. Not in the dramatic way of people who need to hear themselves speak in order to believe what they are saying. She made it quietly, in the space behind her eyes. The kind of promise that does not need witnesses, because it is made to yourself, and you are the only person who will ever know whether or not you kept it. She began to walk again. She had covered perhaps 1.5 miles when she heard it, a deep, rhythmic drumming against the earth, growing louder, coming fast. Not one horse, many horses. The hoofbeats of animals moving with specific, deliberate purpose. Not a pack on a hunt, not a traveler. Something organized, something directed. She stepped off the road quickly, pressing herself against the rough bark of a pine tree, pulling her green dress close so the moonlight would not catch it. The procession rounded the bend. She felt the breath leave her body. 5 midnight black horses, massive, perfectly matched, each one the color of deep water, leading a carriage unlike anything she had seen outside of high-ceremony history books. The carriage was obsidian black, its lacquered panels catching moonlight in long silver lines. On its door, painted in silver and deep gold, was a crest she recognized the moment she saw it. A snarling wolf beneath a crown of thorns. The royal seal. The Alpha King. She was still pressed against the pine tree, her heart completely still in her chest when the carriage slowed. Not gradually. Not the way something slows when a driver spots an obstacle in the road. It stopped, precisely deliberately, as if the driver had known exactly where she would be. Old Alexander, the gatekeeper of the Silverwood Pack Hall, was still adjusting the iron latch on the great oak doors long after Rachel Mooncrest had gone through them. His eyes were wet. He had watched her walk out of that hall with her back straight, and her hands steady, and her head held at exactly the angle that his own grandmother had told him, when he was very young, was the angle of a person who refuses to be diminished. And he had said nothing, because there was nothing he could say, and because sometimes the most honest thing a person can offer another is the dignity of not making them explain their pain. He did not know, standing there in the torchlight with his old hands on the cold iron, that what had just walked out of the Silverwood Pack Hall was not a story ending. It was a story beginning. The carriage door opened. No footman descended first. No herald called out a title. The man himself stepped down from the carriage into the frost and the moonlight, and the sheer, quiet weight of his presence arranged itself across the night the way the landscape arranges itself around a mountain, everything else becoming context. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat with a high collar, no crown, no visible embellishment. He did not need embellishment. Men who carry that kind of authority in their bones stopped needing to announce themselves long ago. His eyes, when they found her, still pressed against the pine, still very carefully not breathing, were silver, not grey, not pale blue in the moonlight. Silver. The unmistakable mark of a born alpha king, the rarest genetic inheritance in the entire wolf world. It occurred perhaps once in 4 generations, and when it did, there was no pretending. You looked into those eyes, and every piece of ancestral wolf instinct in your blood recognized what it was looking at. Harrison Wolfbane, alpha king of all packs, looked at her. "Rachel Mooncrest," he said. His voice was low and resonant. Not loud, it simply had the quality of filling whatever space it entered, the way deep water fills a vessel. It was not a question. She stepped away from the pine tree. She straightened her spine. She smoothed the front of her green dress with both hands and lifted her chin and gave her name to the cold night air without flinching. "Your Majesty." She inclined her head exactly the appropriate depth for a pack daughter addressing the sovereign. No more, no less. I was not aware the king travelled this road. He walked toward her. He stopped at a careful, deliberate distance, close enough that his frame blocked the worst of the wind off the ridge, far enough that a woman who had just had her dignity stripped in a room full of people was not being asked to manage an additional invasion of her space. She noticed that. She filed it away. "Dominic Ashfang ended the betrothal tonight," he said. "Also not a question." She looked at him steadily. "How could you possibly?" "Because I withdrew my formal endorsement of his Eastern Territory claim 4 days ago." His silver eyes did not move from hers. They were very still, those eyes. They had the quality of things that are not affected by weather. I knew what he would do when the Winterborn Alliance became his only available option. I needed to see how quickly. The silence between them expanded. Rachel felt the pieces arrange themselves with the particular coldness of understanding something you did not want to understand. "You used me," she said. Her voice was quiet and very precise. Harrison Wolfbane did not flinch. He did not offer the kind of rapid, practiced denial that guilty people reach for. He met her gaze and he said, "You were collateral damage in a calculation about a weak man's choices. For that, I owe you a debt." She looked at him for a long moment. She had expected, what? Arrogance, perhaps. Dismissal. The kind of self-assurance that does not bother accounting for the people it displaces, because it does not consider them significant enough to account for. She had met pack lords like that. She had managed their dinners and memorized their territories and watched them move through the world as if the people around them were furniture. Harrison Wolfbane was not doing that. He was standing in the cold and the moonlight and looking at her as if she were an actual person whose experience was an actual fact, and the unexpected plainness of it, no performance, no apology dressed up as explanation, was, she realized, the closest thing to honesty she had heard from a man of rank in 2 years. She uncrossed her arms. "What is it you want, Your Majesty?" "You are not walking 4 miles alone in the dark," he said. "Come inside. There is something I need to say to you, and I will not say it on a frost road." She looked at the carriage. She looked at the black horses, who were entirely indifferent to all of this. She looked at the empty moonlit road behind her, stretching 4 miles through the dark toward a home where her father would be awake, worrying, not yet knowing. She walked to the carriage. She got in. Inside, it was warm in the particular way of spaces that are designed for long journeys, a small lamp burning amber light, deep crimson upholstery, a folded wool blanket on the seat. Harrison settled across from her and reached, without ceremony or tenderness, for the blanket. He placed it on the seat beside her, not around her shoulders. Beside her, available, in the way you put a tool within reach of someone who may need it. She picked it up. She wrapped it around her shoulders. Neither of them spoke about the gesture. "I need a mate," he said. Rachel waited. "Not a love match," he continued. "An alliance. I have watched sentiment destroy everything my parents built between them. My father's love for my mother made him careless. It gave his enemies something to reach for. I will not build my reign on something that can be used against me." He looked at her with those unmoving silver eyes. "I need a partner who understands what loyalty costs. A woman who has just felt what betrayal does and chose dignity over collapse." Outside, the forest moved past the carriage window in dark, slow shapes. "What you are describing," Rachel said carefully, "is a transaction. It is an accord," he said, "with specific terms." She was quiet for a moment. "Go on. Your family's pack comes under royal protection immediately. Your father's territorial debts are settled. Your social standing is restored, higher than it has ever been. In exchange, you stand beside me, you manage my household's political calendar, and you give us both the legitimacy of a formal mating bond." "And you?" she said. "What do you get?" "A partner who cannot be dismissed as a decoration," he said, without hesitation. "You know pack politics. You have been operating inside them for 2 years with a man who never once noticed how well you were doing it." "I have noticed." She absorbed this. The lamp swayed gently as the carriage rounded a bend. "There is a dissolution clause," he added. 5 years. If after 5 years you find the arrangement unbearable, you leave with a protected estate and a formal settlement. The bond remains on paper. You lose nothing. Rachel looked at him across the warm amber light. She thought about what she was being offered. Not love. She understood that. And she was not a woman who required the comfort of illusions. She was being offered something arguably more durable than love: power, protection, and the chance to stand in rooms where the decisions that shaped wolf society were actually made, rather than simply managing the aftermath of those decisions for men who would never acknowledge her contribution. "I have conditions," she said. Something shifted, very slightly, in Harrison Wolfbane's expression. Not surprise. More like the particular attention of someone who has encountered something unexpected and has decided to take it seriously. "I will not be a decoration," she said. "Not in private, not in public. If I am to hold the title of Alpha Queen, I hold a real seat in your council. My voice is heard on territorial matters, on pack law, on alliances." She paused. "And I want to be present at the next full moon gathering, the formal one, the one where Dominic Ashfang will be in attendance." Harrison looked at her steadily. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the echo of one. "If you say yes tonight," he said, "I will ensure you have the entire gathering as your stage." He extended his hand. She looked at it. The scar across his knuckles caught the lamplight, a long, jagged white line from some territorial dispute in years past. She had seen that scar once before, at a spring gathering 3 seasons ago, and she had asked him, bold and young, and not yet thinking about consequences, simply, "Does it still hurt?" She had not known who he was when she asked. He had been standing apart from the formal proceedings, and she had thought him merely another pack lord with old wounds. He had answered, sometimes, with the expression of a man who had never been asked the question before. He had never forgotten that she asked. She placed her hand in his. It was warm and certain, and nothing at all like a rescue. "Then we have an accord, Your Majesty," she said. He looked at their joined hands for exactly 1 beat longer than the moment required. "Harrison," he said. "When we are not performing for a room, my name is Harrison." The carriage moved through the dark forest, and the moon watched them through the window, and somewhere behind them on the road, a green dress walked away from a life that had never deserved the woman wearing it. Harrison's convoy did not take her to her father's house first. It took her to his formidable aunt, Margaret Wolfbane, Countess of the Northern Reaches, occupied a house on the eastern edge of the Capital Territories that was not the largest or most dramatic house in the region, but was perhaps the most efficient. Every item in it had a purpose. Every person in it had a function. Margaret herself was a woman of 63, who had the posture of a woman of 40, the mind of a general, and the tongue of someone who had decided somewhere around the age of 35 that pleasantries were a waste of time that belonged to people with nothing better to do. She listened to Rachel's account in its entirety, without interrupting once. Then she stood. She straightened the sleeves of her jacket. "Finally," she said, "a woman who walked out instead of down." And she set to work. The next 3 days moved with the particular productive energy of a house that has been given a clear objective. Seamstresses arrived. A bondsmith, the wolf world's equivalent of a jeweler, a craftsman who worked with the specific metals used in royal bonding ceremonies, came with a case of stones that caught the light in colors Rachel had no words for. A pack healer examined the minor scratches she had collected on the frost road and treated them with the brisk efficiency of someone who considered minor injuries a personal inconvenience. Margaret supervised all of it with the serenity of a general who has fought this campaign before and knows precisely where everything goes. On the second morning, Rachel's father arrived. Christopher Mooncrest came through the door looking 10 years older than he had the last time she had seen him. His face was grey. His shoulders carried the weight of a man who has spent 2 sleepless nights imagining the worst and finding nothing to argue against it. He saw his daughter across the entrance hall. She crossed the room to him. She took both his hands in hers. "Papa," she said quietly, "everything is all right. I heard. They told me at the border that the king's convoy," he could not finish the sentence. "Sit down," she said. "Let me explain." She told him everything, not the version that was kind to her own emotions, but the plain version. The accord, the terms, the dissolution clause, the 5-year arrangement that was honest about what it was, and did not pretend to be something warmer. Christopher Mooncrest sat very still and listened to his daughter describe the most significant moment of her life with the kind of calm, analytical clarity he had tried to teach her when she was small, and he realized, sitting in that straight-backed chair in Margaret Wolfbane's formidably organized house, that she had learned it much better than he had ever managed himself. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Are you safe?" he said. "I am," she said. "Are you?" He paused. He tried again. "Is this what you want?" She considered the question the way she always considered things that mattered, honestly, without performing certainty she didn't have. "I want to stand in rooms where the decisions are made," she said, "instead of managing the dinners afterward." "Yes. This is what I want." He nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. Then he looked up at his daughter. And his expression was the complicated one of a parent who is simultaneously relieved and broken-hearted and profoundly proud all at once. "Then I am proud of you," he said. "Your mother would have been proud." An hour later, Harrison met with him privately. Rachel did not attend that meeting. She stood at the window of Margaret's upstairs sitting room and watched the late afternoon light move across the grounds, and she was still standing there when her father emerged through the front door below, walking with a straightness in his spine that she had not seen since she was a child, since before the territorial debts and the long, lean years and the slow accumulation of a quiet man's quiet defeats. He looked up at the window, as if he knew she would be there. He nodded once. She pressed her hand flat against the glass and let herself, quietly, cry. Not for Dominic Ashfang or for the life she had been promised, but for the relief of watching her father breathe freely again. Sometimes that is what grief looks like. Not loss. Relief. The two can feel almost identical in the body. Elsewhere, in the Silverwood Pack hall, Dominic Ashfang had been busy. He was not a man who tolerated an unflattering narrative when a flattering one was available, and he had spent the 3 days since Rachel's departure constructing one with considerable effort. He had told his version everywhere. Rachel had been volatile, he intimated, emotionally unpredictable, unsuitable for the particular pressures of a Bater's household. He never quite said she had behaved badly. He implied it with the specific, deniable precision of someone who has learned that what people infer is more durable than what is stated outright. He mentioned, with careful vagueness, that she may have developed feelings for someone else, that there had been signs, for some time, that her heart was not fully committed. The pack accepted the story. Juliet Winterbourne listened to all of it, and squeezed Dominic's arm and smiled her restrained, polished smile, and said nothing, because she did not need to. The story was doing exactly what she required. Neither of them knew what was being prepared 4 territories away. On the 4th morning, Rachel stood before the long mirror in the room Margaret had assigned her, and looked at what the last 4 days had made. The gown Margaret and the seamstresses had built for the grand moon ceremony was the color of the sky at the precise moment before a storm becomes visible. That deep, charged blue-black that is more feeling than color, that makes the air taste electric and the body know, before the mind does, that something is coming. It was made of midnight velvet that caught light like still water, with silver thread embroidered at the hem and the cuffs in the particular pattern used in royal bonding ceremonies, recognizable to every wolf in every pack who had spent any time in formal society. And at her throat, Margaret clasped the royal bonding stone. It was a deep silver gem set in black metal, heavy and old and cold against her skin. It had not been worn in public in 20 years, not since Harrison's mother had walked these same territories as queen in better days, before the political fractures that had reshaped the pack alliances. Every wolf who saw it would recognize immediately what it meant, before the herald said a word. Margaret stepped back and looked at her. "They will not see a woman Dominic Ashfang discarded," she said. "Look at me, child. Who are you?" Rachel looked at her own reflection. She straightened her shoulders. She raised her chin. "I am the Alpha Queen," she said. Margaret's expression did not change, but her eyes, very briefly, said something that might, in another woman, have been warmth. "Yes," she said. "You are. Now let's go remind them." Harrison appeared in her doorway that evening precisely on time. He was formally dressed, a dark coat with the royal mark visible at his collar, silver at his cuffs, the controlled, deliberate elegance of a man who treats formal ceremony the way a soldier treats a campaign, as something to be executed precisely and without unnecessary ornamentation. He looked at her. He said nothing for exactly 1 beat longer than was necessary. "You look," he said finally, "like someone who has already won." Rachel pulled on her gloves. She smoothed the wrist of the left one carefully. "Then let's go remind them," she said. His silver eyes held something that moved briefly before he caught it. "The carriage is waiting," he said. She walked past him through the doorway, and the royal bonding stone caught the torchlight and blazed silver at her throat. And the storm that had been building for 4 days was 1 hour away from breaking. The Grand Moon ceremony was held in the great Alpha Hall of the Central Territories, a building that had stood for 3 centuries and had hosted every alliance, every formal mating bond announcement, every territorial agreement of consequence in the Pack world. Its ceilings were vaulted stone, its floors were polished granite, its walls were hung with the crests of 12 allied packs in silk and hammered metal. 300 wolves filled its tiered interior, pack elders, alpha lords, their bonded mates, their heirs, the oldest families and the newest alliances, arranged in the careful, deliberate geography of formal power, who stood closest to the center, who stood near the back, whose crest hung nearest the high window. Dominic Ashfang stood near the front. He had chosen his position carefully. He was wearing his best formal coat. Juliet Winterbourne stood at his side, her golden hair arranged perfectly, her expression the masterpiece of composed pleasantness that it always was. He had told his story enough times now that it felt like history. Settled, verified, done. He was not afraid. He had no reason to be. He did not yet know what was waiting at the top of the ceremonial stairs. The herald's voice carried through the hall like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. His Majesty, Harrison Wolfbane, Alpha King of the realm, and his bonded mate, Rachel of the House Mooncrest, Alpha Queen of all packs. The room stopped. Not the polite hush of ceremony that falls when a sovereign enters. Something different. Something that fell too fast and too completely, the way sound stops before a storm reaches you. That absolute, breath-held stillness. Harrison appeared at the top of the ceremonial stairs. He stood there for exactly long enough to let the room take in the fact of him, the particular, unignorable quality of his presence, which had never required announcement, and which the room's animal instincts recognized before its rational minds could process it. Then he turned. He offered his arm, and Rachel Mooncrest stepped out of the archway shadow and took it. The collective sound that moved through 300 wolves was not quite a gasp, and not quite a murmur. It was something older than either, the sound of a room full of people revising, simultaneously, every assumption they had made about the architecture of the world. The midnight gown, the silver thread, the stone at her throat, the royal bonding stone. 20 years. It had been 20 years since it was worn in public, and every wolf in that hall old enough to remember knew exactly what it meant. And every wolf young enough not to remember could read it in the faces of the elders. And so the knowledge moved through the room in a wave, front to back, tier to tier, until there was no one left in the hall who did not understand what they were looking at. The future. Walking down a flight of stairs on the Alpha King's arm. The descent was slow, deliberate, designed to be witnessed. Harrison's hand covered hers on his arm, a brief, deliberate pressure of warmth that only she could feel. "Chin up," he said, low enough only for her ears. "Look at them as though they are simply part of the landscape." Rachel lifted her chin. She found, across the room, the figure of Dominic Ashfang. He was standing perfectly still, with a champagne glass going cold in his hand, and his face was doing something that it was not equipped for. the expression of a man who has built his entire narrative on a foundation and just watched that foundation change shape. Juliet Winterbourne's polished smile had developed a flaw. Rachel held Dominic's gaze. She did not look away first. They reached the floor. The crowd parted around them, the way water moves around something that does not slow down for it. Dominic could not help himself. He stepped forward. He blocked their path. "Rachel." His voice was too loud and not loud enough at the same time. What is the meaning of this?" Rachel stopped. She looked at Dominic Ashfang with a calm so complete it was nearly a form of artistry. At her side, she felt Harrison go very still, the stillness of something large and controlled that is making a deliberate decision not to move yet. "Good evening, Dominic." Her voice was pleasant. Entirely, genuinely pleasant. "Juliet, I hope the season has treated you well. You are bonded to the king," Dominic said, with the specific disorientation of a man who has spent a week reading a map and just discovered the map was wrong. Harrison stepped forward. His height and his stillness made Dominic's agitation look very small. "Rachel Mooncrest is my bonded mate," he said, and his voice had that quality it always had, quiet, absolute, filling the room without effort. "I would ask you to address your queen with the regard her title commands." Ashfang. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Harrison's voice, carrying to every corner of the great hall. "You released her from a cage you called a future. I simply opened the door." Somewhere near the back of the hall, a glass met the stone floor. Juliet Winterbourne looked at the bonding stone at Rachel's throat. She looked at the Alpha King. She looked at Rachel, the woman she had dismissed 3 weeks ago without a second thought, because she had seemed like the kind of problem that resolves itself when the right pressure is applied. Juliet made a calculation. "I believe," she said, in a voice of careful pleasantness, "my father expressed some concerns about the Eastern territorial arrangement that I really ought to discuss with him before anything is formalized." She smiled at no one in particular. "Please excuse me." She excused herself into the crowd. Dominic watched her go. He looked, for the first time that evening, genuinely alone. Harrison guided Rachel away. Not urgently, not as if they were escaping anything. The way you move through a room when the room belongs to you. He collected 2 glasses from a passing server and offered her one. "You look," he said, low and even, "as though you are enjoying this." "Is that inappropriate?" she asked. "It is entirely appropriate," he said, and something that might have been warmth moved briefly through his silver eyes, caught and contained before it could settle. Rachel watched Dominic across the room. He stood in the center of the great hall with the particular, exposed quality of a man who has been positioned by a crowd that has lost interest in him. The way a piece of furniture gets abandoned in the middle of a room after a party rearranges itself. She had expected when she imagined this moment, and she had imagined it in the last 4 days, more than she would have admitted, to feel triumph, the hot, clear satisfaction of a scales tipping the right direction. She found instead something cooler and far more final. Indifference. He was not worth the fire of triumph. She had loved him once. That was done. He was simply a man who had made a choice and would carry the consequences of it. She did not need to feel anything about that. She simply needed to move forward. She turned toward the open terrace doors, where the night air was coming in cold and clean, and Harrison moved with her, his hand still on her arm. "Is it always like this?" she asked him. He considered the question with the gravity he gave most things. "No," he said. Usually it is considerably more complicated. Good, she said. I would hate to be bored. He looked at her. 1 beat, 2 beats, the particular beat longer that she was beginning to recognize as something he